Welcome to the Candor Intelligence Brief. It is October 20th, 2024. It's only a short time until the election, so everybody is pulling out all the stops. Everybody is trying to use any technique possible to influence the election. Now, some of it is outright illegal, some of it is gray area, and some of it is just plain unregulated at this point. Now, for example, we now got some more information on some of these Trump claims concerning the last election of 2020, because there's still lawsuits happening. And we now hear this. Attorney General Bill Barr told Donald Trump that his claims of election fraud were crazy. Judge Tanya Chutkan unsealed nearly 2,000 pages of evidence in the former president's election fraud case on Friday, despite impassioned pleading from Trump's lawyers that it could damage his presidential campaign. So, the one I specifically remember addressing were the Dominion voting machines. Mr. Barr told Representative Liz Cheney during a June 2022 meeting with the January 6th committee. I made the point that it was crazy for them to be wasting their time on this because they had been easily checked because they're tabulation machines and all you have to do is compare the tabulation with the ballots, and I just thought it was crazy. Okay, so what's going on here? Now, you have to understand how the American system works, and the mainstream really doesn't understand it. And also these alternative media circles, they also don't understand how the system really works. So you're voting for a candidate, but you're getting the political party. And when you're getting a political party, you're getting the more or less secret or sometimes very secret structures behind the party. Now, with the Democrats, it's a lot of Russian influence for a long time, communist influence, Chinese influence, these old communist networks. And there's a really good project out by Trevor Loudon. You may want to check that out. Detailing all this entire communist background of Kamala Harris. And I've done shows on this recently, a show with Jeff Nyquist on this. I've done a show with multiple people on this, detailing this stuff. So this is what you're actually getting. You're voting for a person, you're getting the party, and you're also getting these secret networks behind the party. Now, with the Republicans, it's not about Trump. You can vote Trump, but you should be voting for the Republican Party, and you should be influencing the Republican Party to change. Trump isn't really making decisions. Trump is really not capable of making important decisions. He doesn't know about these topics, and he's not a man you can really work with. That's been painfully clear. Almost nobody wants to work with him, and he's been so bad that it has caused people in an unnecessary way to turn on Trump and in turn turn on the Republican Party. There's so many people now, Republican types, who are saying, don't vote Trump, don't vote Trump. But that means not vote Republican, that means the Democrats would win. Just because of Donald's behavior and the behavior of his cult followers. You understand how much damage these cult followers have caused to themselves in America. And these influencers, these disgusting influencers who just want to get rich, who want to be popular, who just fanning up the hype or don't understand the problems of what they're saying, it's disgusting and it's causing damage to America and the rest of the world, right? So you got to understand how this works. Trump was never going to turn the system on its head, and I said this in 2015 and 16. I gave a realistic expectation of what you could expect from a Trump administration. And now I'm giving you a realistic assessment of what you can expect from another Trump administration. It's the Republican Party. And you're going to get these plans that have been hatched out by the Republican Party. You're going to get Project 2025, Heritage Foundation. Not all of it, because they usually get only 2/3 of their stuff really through an administration or underway during administration. And it's not just Heritage, it's these older networks. It's the Skull and Bones network. It goes back to these even older British structures and aristocratic structures. It's other networks inside the Republican Party. So you have to understand what you're getting. You have to vote. You really have to vote Republican. It's just what it is. And it's not really about Trump. And it shouldn't be about Trump. And you should be influencing the Republican Party to have better candidates in the future and to force these terrible people out of the Republican Party. So this is just an example of this, right? So Trump was trying to do this gray area stuff, maybe even illegal stuff. Now he's in trouble just to influence stuff, and it's backfiring. It didn't work. And Fox got damaged by this because they ran with these claims. Even when Attorney General Bill Barr said, you're not going to find a sensation there. We quadruple checked. And behind Barr are these old elites, these Republican elites, and they said, no, there's no sensation there. And you can't be a fool and say, Barr secretly works for the deep state and these others are working for the deep state when you don't even know what that really is or really means. You're just following stuff that you read on the internet or heard on the internet. It doesn't work either. Because if you do that, and every time somebody says something you don't like, and somebody does something you don't like, and you call them deep state, you're going to call almost everybody deep state at some point. And who's left to save you in your imagination? Donald Trump? He's not going to save you. And he doesn't have a magic team behind him. That's been my number one concern back in 2015 and 16 when people claimed there's a secret team behind Trump and they're going to save everybody and they're going to arrest the Democrats. And this myth has been around for decades. This was going on in the 60s and 70s with the John Birch Society, who dominated conspiracy media back then. They promised this same stuff. It's just this old myth that had been recycled for the 2016 Trump campaign. It's just what it is. You have to understand these things. Otherwise, you're just causing more damage. And now, of course, the Democrats are doing this gray area stuff. The Democrats are trying to legalize illegal migrants and turn them into voters and all that. We understand that, what's going on. And there's also this gray area stuff where the Democrats, they make claims and they know it's not a realistic claim. They're saying stuff like, if Trump wins, he will really implement a dictatorship. He will be a dictator. No, he's not. It's the same stuff you saw last time. The same stuff you saw in the Reagan administration. Same stuff you saw in the Bush administration. It's always the same. For the most part. It's the same system. And it was the same hype against Reagan. It was the same hype against Bush. It was the same hype over and over again. The Democrats know that Trump can't make these big decisions. And they know most of what he says is just nonsense, or it doesn't matter, or it's deliberate obfuscation. That's what General Kellogg said. It was deliberate obfuscation when Trump said positive things about the Russians. It was just strategy. It was a super tough foreign policy, but saying nice things, and it creates confusion with the Russians, makes America seem unpredictable. And it also says we're going to be tough, but there's a diplomatic door open when the Russians really change. Right? So there's that. And the Democrats, for the most part, they know this. But they're saying this stuff. And they've been saying this for a long time, and they've made allusions concerning, they've said some things that sound like violence against Trump, and then we had these assassination attempts. So this is all gray area stuff, sometimes even illegal stuff. But you have to understand really how the system works and how much it is based on intelligence methods. And there's a story here from 404 Media, and it talks about an Elon Musk-funded group called Future Coalition PAC. And this PAC is targeting Muslim voters in Michigan and Jewish voters in Pennsylvania with diametrically opposed political advertisements about Kamala Harris and her stance on Israel. So, in areas of Michigan with relatively large Muslim populations, the Super PAC is painting Harris as a close friend of Israel and is suggesting that she is beholden to the beliefs of her Jewish husband, Doug Emhoff. In parts of Pennsylvania with relatively large Jewish populations, the advertisements call Harris anti-Semitic and say she supports denying Israel the weapons needed to defeat the Hamas terrorists who massacred thousands. And it goes on and on like this. So you find more material on Candor Intel, my website, and on this channel. You can find more information about the modern era of micro-targeting and psychometrics. Now, this has been around since at least 1959 with the Simulmatics Corporation. There's a really good book out on that. I recommend you read that if you have the time. And it talked about the early computers and the early computer code they wrote to predict people's behavior, to understand what Joe Schmo's personality type is. Why is he voting this? Why is he functioning like that? How does his brain work? And so then you can predict his behavior, and then you can say, well, Joe Schmo is kind of similar to these other people over there, so we can group them together, where you can predict how this group is going to react. And so the computer got faster, the data got better, and the algorithms got better, and now you call everything AI, artificial intelligence. Now, not every algorithm is an artificial intelligence. It's kind of a buzzword these days, but still, it's become pretty serious. And they understand how your mind works. So they tailor this stuff to your liking. So they understand. They know that you out there, for example, that you have a problem with authority because you didn't experience good authority. So maybe your parents were not a good authority. Your teachers were not good authority. School system was not good authority. Politicians that affect you were not good leaders. And just the system you came to, or you had to live in, the system was not good authority. And so you have that kind of a outlook on authority, right? And so that makes you vulnerable to this manipulative conspiracy propaganda that's out there on the internet, that is tailored toward you, that is made so you will click on it and you will believe everything. And then they mix some stuff in it that's really true, or in a broad sense true, but then they put all this other stuff in there that's not true. And they can predict your behavior, and then they can feed you all this other stuff to make you vote this or that or support Trump, and it's really not a good candidate, and it's not good for you. That's how it works. That's really how it works. So then you got Mark Milley. Mark Milley, the U.S. Army general who Donald Trump appointed as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Milley now says the current Republican presidential nominee is a fascist to the core, or said Trump was a fascist to the core, said no person has ever posed more of a danger to the United States. Nobody is as bad as Trump. Where do these quotes come from? So this is in Bob Woodward's new book. It's called War. And so Woodward writes that when he approached Milley at a reception, the general spoke first and told him, we got to talk. No one has ever been as dangerous to this country as Trump. He's the most dangerous person ever. Mental decline, blah, blah, blah. Now I realize he's a total fascist. He's now the most dangerous person to this country. Fascist to the core. That's what Milley said. But what was really the context? Does Milley really believe Trump is the most dangerous person? When Trump cannot really make big decisions anyway. Trump cannot decide what he wants to do. On paper, he has a big authority, but that's not reality. Did Mark Milley really believe that? Does Bob Woodward really understand this? Does Bob Woodward really think, if you put in these quotes in the book, that's representative of what Mark Milley really thinks, and it's representative of what reality really is? Why is Bob Woodward doing this? Is this gray area or worse? And then we got this, Christopher Steele in Newsweek. What interesting timing. So this was the guy with the Trump dossier. Remember that guy? He worked for, I think it was British intelligence, and he got sort of left or whatever, was let go. He worked for a private intelligence company. And so he had these customers. It was big corporations or political groups or whatever. And these customers could hire that company to spy, to gather intelligence. And so that's what he did. He was contracted to assemble a dossier to find anything bad concerning Trump and his relations with Russians, or middlemen of the Russians. That's what Christopher Steele was contracted for, and that's what he delivered, right? Okay, fair enough. So assembled the dossier, handed it to the customer, got paid for it, and it was admittedly labeled in the dossier. This is what I found out. Can't say 100%. This is what I've heard. It's less corroborated. That is more corroborated. That is less corroborated. And this is what you would expect as the customer of that intelligence, right? Because this is how the intelligence game works. Sometimes you can say something definitive. Sometimes, mostly you can't. So you just present an image and say, this is what the intelligence tells us. You make sense of it. And you have to decide whether you're going to take specific action on that basis. Okay? So fair enough. And this is what Christopher Steele is now saying in Newsweek, big piece. He's saying he made the dossier, sold it, and then it got leaked to the public, and then his name was all over media, and he was criticized unfairly, blah, blah, blah. People called it P-Gate because of some events that allegedly happened in a hotel room in Russia, and Trump was allegedly watching some bizarre act in the hotel room, whatever. And so it was all over the media. Christopher Steele's name was all over the media. And everybody was accusing everybody. Some people accused Trump, of course, of being a total tool of the Russians. And the others said, no, if you make that accusation, then you're a tool of the globalist conspiracy, and blah, blah. Everybody was accusing everybody. Nobody understood what they were talking about. Or nobody wanted to be objective about this because that's not what the audience wants. So, just as a reminder, there have been some really significant contacts of Trump and Russians and middlemen of the Russians, but it's unclear what these contacts mean. It's unclear who was allowing these contacts, because Trump is a connected man. He had contacts. He could pick up the phone and call someone from the Barr family. He can pick up the phone and call someone and get, really, really close to the highest level, to the CIA. No problem. Really good contacts to the FBI. There's a big anti-communist history with Trump and his father and the whole Roy Cohn stuff and chasing communists and stuff. So there's that. So you have to, interpret this information. When Trump has these Russian contacts, what does it mean? It can mean many things. And I've explained the different scenarios. But that's not what the Democrats want to talk about. Because, God forbid, people would actually understand that maybe Trump's contacts and Trump's actions, maybe Trump's contacts and actions, maybe that had something to do with counterintelligence. Luring in some Russians into the Trump Tower and the condos and real estate and getting them closer to the West, so then maybe somebody could try to recruit them. If people understood that that's a realistic possibility, that would change a lot of people's perception of it. So the Democrats don't want to talk about that, and the media people don't want to talk about that, and Christopher Steele doesn't want to talk about that. Even though Christopher Steele should understand this as an intelligence professional. And he's saying in Newsweek, I'm a professional, I have professional ethics, I was, just doing my job and I got blamed for it, blah, 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 blah. But then he's basically telling you that, Trump is bad and it sounds like you should vote Democrat. And he's scared to go back to the U.S., he says, when Trump gets in office again. What? That's not a professional interpretation of it. I mean, he should have written that into his dossier that he sold back then. Should have said, well, these are the contacts and the whole Manafort stuff and this oligarch and that oligarch. It's serious stuff that I've found, but it can mean different things. So be careful with your interpretation of the facts. That should have been in the dossier. And once it leaked to the public, Christopher Steele became a public figure and he had to start talking about his work, then Christopher Steele should have said that. There's a larger context. It could mean many things. Don't jump to conclusions. That would have been professional, but that's not what Christopher Steele did. And that's not what he's doing now. So this is my professional criticism of Christopher Steele. So don't get this myopic tunnel view. Trump is the worst person ever, and Trump is gonna blah, 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 blah. You're voting the Republican Party, and you're getting these secret networks behind the Republican Party. That's just realistically what you're getting. And so, yeah, you should be aware of all this. Okay, so the next topic is the whole war topic. So now we had Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. He said his country needs NATO, so it doesn't have to rely on nuclear weapons for protection. Now, this was at the European Council Summit in Brussels a couple of days ago. So he made a very fair point. He said that we gave up our nuclear weapons from the Soviet era, and in return, we got these security guarantees. So now we're not really getting a fulfillment of these guarantees. So now we rely on Western help and all that. We're not getting NATO membership. So the implication of Zelensky's words is, so if we don't get NATO membership, we have to make our own nuclear weapons. And everybody who understands these things knows that this is just painfully obvious. And it has been painfully obvious for years. And Zelensky even years ago said this, and other Ukrainians said this in public. People just didn't pay that much attention to it. They said, we need nuclear deterrence. We cannot rely on Western nuclear deterrence. And the West doesn't want to get into a nuclear shooting war with the Russians. So we Ukrainians have to take care of it ourselves. We need our Ukraine needs to have its own nuclear weapons so that the Russians don't do anything stupid. It's just what it is. And of course, if you have nuclear power plants, like Ukraine does, you have facilities, you have experts, you can make nuclear weapons. That's the same stuff that's been prepared by the Japanese, South Koreans, other countries, Iranians. Everybody wants to have nuclear power so they can make nuclear weapons when they need to. And they want to bring everything close to that point of actually making warheads. So there's only a time delay of about 2 weeks, 3 weeks. When you give the order, you can actually assemble the nuclear warheads. So this is the same thing that the Ukrainians want and the Ukrainians need. Very easy to understand. So, and this is kind of the same thing for biological weapons and chemical weapons, right? And I've explained this in detail in some other videos and some other pieces that I wrote in my books that you can get on Amazon. It's the same with biological and chemical weapons. Now, every moron can make chemical weapons. You just need to have the industry for pesticides and other chemicals. You can make chemical weapons. It's simple. And same with biological weapons. You can mass produce anthrax, botulinum. You can mass produce smallpox. The classics. And you can also refine them and store them. Any moron can do this. So, in theory, the Russians could just fit a specific warhead to a specific rocket, fire it, just launch it and detonate it over Kiev, and then there's a chemical released or a biological agent released. That's an incapacitating agent, not a killing agent. It's an incapacitating agent. So that means Kiev cannot function. They cannot really work. They cannot really fight. And so then most of Ukraine would capitulate. And there would be a Russian threat of more such weapons being used. And so there would be a capitulation of all of Ukraine or most of Ukraine, right? In theory. But once Ukraine actually has its own chemical weapons and its own biological weapons, the Russians can't do that. And same with nuclear weapons, because if the Russians do it, then it happens to them over there. And we saw these drones, these Ukrainian drones that made their way into Moscow and made their way deep into Russian territory. It was a signal: we can hit you where it hurts, so don't use these nuclear weapons, biological and chemical weapons. Okay, so what comes next? If these weapons are not really being used, if it's off the table for the foreseeable future, what is then left? Manpower and war production. That's what you're left with. And what does it look like now? Of course, the Ukrainian production was very high quality. Ukrainian production was very important to the Russians until 2014 when the exports were stopped. The Russians could never really make up for it. The precision engines and rocket parts and all that sort of stuff. The Russians used to buy it from Ukraine, but no longer. So there's a quality production in Ukraine. There's also a specific level of production in Ukraine. But they're limited because of the electricity, and they're limited for other factors. So some of the Ukrainian production was outsourced or moved to Poland and some other secret places. And then you got limited weapons production in Europe. They're not really going for it yet. And there's also limited arms production still in the United States. So when it comes to these smaller rockets, the rocket engines, how much are we actually making? How many production facilities do we actually have? So it's not that big of a war production in the West yet. But the Russians have years ago. The Russians have decided to go for a full-blown war economy. That's what Russia has decided. So the Russians have production problems, and the Russians also have a huge problem with manpower. They don't have enough people in Russia. They don't have enough young men in Russia. But these problems, they can be offset over there. They can be offset with the help of China and North Korea. So you can get more and more people, soldiers and workers. You can get an insane number of people, manpower. You can get that from these Asian communists, the Chinese and the North Koreans, the North Koreans, and you can also get a lot of production from China, and it becomes a massive problem. So it's kind of different than it was in the Cold War. In the Cold War, Russia or the Soviet Union, they were producing a lot of stuff, and they went broke. But back then, China wasn't as industrialized. Now it is. And North Korea back then wasn't as strong as it's now. So in the recent couple of days, we got all these reports and all these commentaries about North Korean soldiers being moved to Russia, re-equipped in Russia, retrained in Russia, and then it's expected that these people will then be moved into Ukraine. Some say it's 1,500 special forces. Other intelligence reports say it's 10,000 people or 11,000 people or 15,000 people. And I've explained this before. It could go up to 100,000 people from North Korea. It could go up to 250,000, 500,000 people from North Korea, because they have potentially millions of soldiers that are somewhat trained and on reserve. It could be millions in the future. And NATO knows that. And they've known this for a long time. They just haven't said it in public. I've been saying this for a long time. And that's just North Korea. That's not even China yet. So when China gets into this, you got a communist war production, you got all this communist manpower, and how are we going to react to it? Because most people in the West, they're not willing to fight. They're not capable of fighting, especially the young generation. Obesity, extreme smoking, and other problems, and just health problems. And no experience with weapons, no experience with camping and physical exertion and all that sort of stuff. So we have a manpower problem in the West. Then people are used to a specific way of life. They're not really willing to accept all these shortages in the West. When we go to a war production, what about the price of electricity? What about the price of fuel, availability of fuel? What about the food in the supermarkets? What about healthcare? What about the things you can afford now? Will you be able to afford them in the future? And when you have money problems now, they may become even worse. And then the government may introduce these work programs. So the government tells you where to work, so you have a roof over your head, but not much else. and they feed you with whatever they can spare. So yeah, that's a bleak future, and so we in the West are not used to this anymore, and we're more likely to rebel against this when our sons are being shipped off to war and they die in the war in large numbers, and we have to live with all these shortages and stuff like that. So we're much more likely to rebel. This is where the communist states, or the Eastern states, Eastern empires, this is where they have the advantage because their people will do anything. They will follow all these orders. And they've done so for a long time. You know, with Russia, it's 1,400,000, more than 1,000 years of brutal classic imperialism, and the people, they always go along with it. So this is the advantage that they have. It's still important to consider nuclear weapons and nuclear war. It's still important to consider biological and chemical weapons, but the deciding factors may be manpower and production, and the willingness or the willingness of the population to go along with it. And you don't know what the result will be of that conflict. You know, it might be a bad, drawn-out conflict, and eventually the superpowers will make some sort of a deal. And that's a bad deal for the population here in the West, and we can never change anything anymore. Or there may be already a secret cartel of the superpowers, because that would be the smart thing to do for the superpowers, to have a secret cartel. But nobody's talking about that except me, of course. You can find that in my books. There was one person who talked about this in the 1960s, and that was Professor Carroll Quigley in this huge book called Tragedy and Hope, and most people haven't even read properly because they just go for these little tiny snippets where he talks about, the development of modern banking, and then people think he's confirming traditional conspiracy media. No, he was not. He was tied in with the Anglos, and he liked the Anglo way of life, but he didn't really understand how deep it goes with the Anglos. He kind of talked about the Miller Group and all that, but he didn't understand how old and big these networks really are, what they're really capable of doing. So he didn't really know that, but Quigley was still very smart, and he talked about the possibility of a cartel of superpowers and the possibility that they would settle for proxy wars. You can read that in the book. It's about page 900, roundabout. It's very far at the end, He talks about how empires develop and how they wage war and production and all that. But at some point with modern weaponry, nuclear, biological, chemical weaponry, it wasn't sensible anymore to continue classic warfare and imperialism because you couldn't actually win anymore with acceptable losses. So what's next? A secret cartel or a quasi-cartel. You call it a quasi-cartel where there's no more choice but to accept this situation, this deadlock. But actually, if you follow that trail even further, then an actual deliberate cartel makes even more sense, and there's really long history of it. So you can't find that stuff anywhere else. Just so you know this. So yeah, there's a debate about how many North Koreans are now involved in all of that. You have to understand the background of it. The Koreans or North Koreans are saying we just got 1.4 million new young people who signed up for the military. They all love it, they say, and they all did it voluntarily. It's, of course, nonsense. There's millions of potential soldiers, indoctrinated people. It's just the same as in China and Russia. The government is a cult. They get you when you're young, and they militarize you, and they brainwash these people over there, and they will be warriors in the future, right? And it's thoroughly communist. It's this communist cult still. And all these shills, all these people said, no, Russia is now conservative. Russia is now Christian. Russia will save us. But it's all just communism. And now you got soon you may have a lot of North Korean troops basically in Europe. What are these propagandists going to say then? These new right-wing guys. What are they going to say then? Well, probably they're going to say, actually, North Korea, they will say North Korea is kind of nationalist. They kind of done their own thing. It's kind of racial with them. And, the Russia and the Chinese, they're also kind of national socialist, blah, 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 blah. They will tell the audience what it wants to hear. Okay, then was a recent story about the policy towards North Korea with the old Trump admin and a potential future Trump administration. So there's all these quotes being tossed around from H.R. McMaster and Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, and they quote some crazy stuff that Trump suggested, like nuking North Korea or the North Korean army during a parade and stuff. Trump doesn't understand these things, right? And so eventually he came out in public and said he wants to make a deal with North Korea. He kind of likes he respects Kim Jong-un now, when he used to insult him. It's kind of strategic talk. That was... And it's the whole policy is run by these experts. It's not run by Trump in any shape or form. And so these articles, they get into this whole thing that was happening with the CIA and the military special command. They were not really talking to each other for a long time. So when the CIA finally started really talking to these military guys, the CIA thought your plans are outdated and they're not realistic. It's like, we go in there with tanks and we meet up with these mountain people in North Korea because they don't like the city people, and we'll just make it work. And the CIA said, are you crazy? Who wrote this? Wile E. Coyote? So yeah, it's like, it's not exactly clear how sophisticated the plan really is towards North Korea, because there's not only the CIA, there's older networks, intelligence networks, that have never been made public. They don't officially exist. You have to reconstruct these intelligence structures, you know, on paper, on file, and say, this is what it probably is. There's not just the CIA. You have to understand that. There's some more stuff. The United States, they want to station more rockets here in Europe, which is good, so you can counter the threat of all these Russian rockets, so they're less likely to use their rockets. Okay, that's a plus, but ultimately comes down to manpower and war production. Then there's this story. It's interesting. It's from the AP, the Associated Press, and it concerns the influencer Ben Swan. Now, Ben Swan is kind of your typical guy. He's tight with the Russians, and he's doing all these conspiracy topics, new right-wing topics. You get a lot of people like Ben Swan, right? And this Ben Swan, he released a video series. It was a 12-part video series. It was called Zelensky Unmasked, about the Ukrainian head of state. And this was, of course, a total smear job. It was reposted by many people on social media. They said it's awesome, you have to watch it, and it was promoted by Donald Trump Jr. So it received a lot of attention, and that was right when Congress was debating increasing military assistance to Ukraine. So, how is this? Is this legal? Is this gray area? What did Ben Swan really do? Right? Now, Ben Swan explains it like this. He says, I have these two companies. One company was registered with the State Department, or the DOJ, I think it was, Justice Department. Right. So it said this one company that I'm involved with, that one company I registered with the Justice Department because we produce stuff for a Russian audience, working with Russia Today, for a foreign audience, and we do all these productions. So that's Russian influence, but that's been properly registered with the Justice Department. And then he says there's this other company that he has, and this company makes video content for an American audience. And so he says, but this is not registered because this is not Russian influence. But is it really? And he's also kind of this Ben Swan guy also started to, or he joined kind of a legal battle against the AP, Associated Press, concerning COVID. And so now the Associated Press is kind of shooting back at him. They've been looking at his output and they're saying, well, is this one company really separate from the Russians? Yeah, but so they watched a bunch of tapes and they checked a lot of records, and it's not looking too good, I think. Of course, that's my impression that I got from it. So, Swan brought on a digital marketing firm to publicize the video series Zelensky Unmasked, and at least one creator acknowledged he was paid to promote the series. Swan filed paperwork with the Justice Department 2 years ago to register one of his companies as working for Russian state media. He said he kept his work for Russian interests separate from what he produces for US audiences. So he operates 2 countries. The only connection is that I own both companies, Swan said. Really, the AP, however, found that there was some overlap in how the 2 entities operated. Handful of guests on Zelensky Unmasked also appeared on RT shows produced by Swan, according to a review of RT's video archives and records filed with the Justice Department. You do not want to mess with the Justice Department when it comes to registering foreign influence. That happened recently to a radical black power group. They got into real trouble for not registering properly. Swan's shows for US audiences and RT also have similar themes. The Zelensky series, for example, echoed Russian state media's messaging. Blah, 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 blah. Swan was a regular TV journalist before he was fired from an Atlanta station in 2018 after promoting the whole Pizzagate thing. Now, if you don't probably remember what happened back then, it was like this. There was these emails from high-ranking Democrats, and it sounded really iffy. They talked about, with this pizza restaurant guy, we're going to meet, and, who brings the cheese pizza. I always talked about the cheese pizza, the CP, and there was some creepy paintings that some of these people post on social media of children, and it was really iffy. But a professional investigator would have looked at these things and said, well, there's a bit of smoke, there may be fire, we need to maybe do an investigation, and we have to justify an investigation, and so you get to move step by step and according to the legal boundaries. And then at some point, maybe you may actually get a search warrant or an indictment, an arrest warrant, right? But you have to collect evidence, real hard evidence, to get to that point, right? That's how professionals do it. But what did these internet people do? They just took these little things and they just claimed there was already a sensation. And even if there was something serious going on, these early reports and the way they were done, these reports could have scared away some really bad people. They would have understood that there was heat on them, attention on them, so they would just destroy evidence and just hide. So you actually sabotage a potential real investigation. Just so you understand what this Pizzagate stuff was. But this Swan guy, he talked about Pizzagate, he talked about Sandy Hook, he talked about nonsense about, the COVID, and then Swan joined Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s anti-vaccine organization, Children's Health Defense, in a lawsuit pending against several news organizations, including the AP, accusing them of violating antitrust laws by taking action to identify misinformation, including about COVID-19 and vaccines. So he's really trying to mess with the AP, right? And so, yeah, Kennedy Jr. is a weird personality. And he's done some good work as a lawyer against corporations who poison, the environment. So he's good at that. He's a good lawyer when it comes to, corporations poisoning something or someone. But Kennedy is not really good when it comes to intelligence and security and the Russians and some really sophisticated stuff. He's not specialized in those topics, but he wants to be the hero when it comes to these topics. Swan said he worked as a correspondent for Russia Today America. RT used to broadcast in America, but then they couldn't broadcast anymore. RT officials then asked if he wanted to produce shows for the network to air outside the US. Swan said he produced 10 shows a week using RT America's old studios in Washington, and he stressed that those shows don't air in the US or Western Europe, although they are visible across the globe on RT's website. Under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, individuals must register with the Justice Department when they seek to influence U.S. policy and public opinion on behalf of foreign governments. Not doing so can result in criminal charges. Some very serious criminal charges. Swan's company, Rebel Media Productions, first registered with the Justice Department in August 2022. so shortly after the Ukraine war, saying it worked for RT's parent company and related entities. The disclosures show Rebel Media Productions was paid more than $6 million in less than 2 years by RT-related entities. Oops. Now, of course, now we know how connected RT, Russia Today, really was, with the intelligence community in Russia and all that. In February, Swan stopped reporting Rebel Media's work for Russia to the Justice Department. Even as his company kept producing RT shows, he said he ended the registration because his attorneys told him it wasn't necessary. Really? Swan said he creates content like the Zelensky Unmasked series for American viewers through another company called Truth in Media. Swan said Truth in Media isn't profitable and is funded by wealthy US individuals whom he refused to name. Most of them own very large companies. Who are these people? Is that really legal? Is that illegal? Is that gray area? Interesting to know. So he says that, well, this company, I'm being paid millions by the Russians, but when that company, I'm not getting paid by the Russians, I'm getting paid by these unnamed wealthy Americans. But the stuff that's produced with these two companies, the stuff kind of sounds the same. There's some same guests, and there's Scott Ritter, and there's Sean Stone, the son of filmmaker Oliver Stone, who seems to be a real fan of Vladimir Putin, but Stone still markets himself as a rebel because he once did these Hollywood movies against Vietnam, the Vietnam War. So then the AP is really bringing out the big guns. They're now questioning in public, is this legal? Did he maybe violate the law? And what about these other people who repost Swan's stuff on social media? Are they getting money for it? Are they getting other benefits from it? Are they in bed with the Russians? Did they register properly? Do they get criminal charges? We'll see. It's very, very serious. So you should never get involved with the Russians. And also, it's not just about criticizing other media people or politicians. It's also about criticizing the audience out there. Do you know what you're doing out there? Are you making the right decisions, or are you promoting stuff and do you like stuff that will ultimately harm you in one way or the other? It's about you. It's about your interests, right? Of course, everybody out there says, well, if you pay money to this, if you follow this stuff, then it's good for you. But is it really? And I'm here to explain there's a lot of stuff that you people out there do that's really bad for you out there. Really bad. Gotta take this stuff really, really seriously. Right. All right. That's it for today. For the Candor Intelligence Brief. We got a second YouTube channel now. It's entirely technical reasons. I'll get to that in detail in the future. So there's a new YouTube channel. The website is candorintel.com. We're also on X. We're on Rumble. You can check that out. We also got the show with Jeff Nyquist. The show is called Friends and Enemies. And there's some other formats that we're doing and we're continuing. So support us. You can support us through Patreon. You can send us money. You can buy my books and there's quite a few books actually right now on Amazon. You can find the links on the website or in the description. You can support us through that because it's really, really complicated to actually know what you're talking about. It's complicated to know what you're talking about, and it's also complicated to really be independent and to really tell it how it is and not be afraid of what the audience might think and the audience may run away from you. Because I'm telling you, most of these influencers, they're completely panicked, they're completely afraid, and they can never tell you what they really, really think and what they're really, really doing. All right, see you next time. Take care, and subscribe to this channel, and leave some comments, and visit our website.